nueva utopía, aquellos que somos socialistas, ¿no? Hablar de la Organización de Economía Social y Solidaria, que puede ser privada, ¿sí? Pero sobre todo debe de ser pública y comunal, comunitaria, ¿sí? Porque ahí es donde, en un momento dado, efectivamente, cuando el criterio de la rentabilidad se debilita, es que realmente se pueden modificar los patrones de producción y de consumo tradicionales. Y yo creo que eso es central. Confieso que los planteamientos de crecimiento a mí no me convencen porque no son suficientes. Yo creo que podemos pensar en decrecimiento, pero una vez que vayamos avanzando en la transformación radical de los patrones de producción y consumo, ¿sí? ¿Por qué? Porque decrecimiento bajo los patrones actuales dominantes, pues todavía hay muchas necesidades básicas que no están cubiertas, ¿sí? Por las economías dominadas por el capitalismo. Entonces, con correlación de fuerzas tan desfavorable, el decrecimiento pues tiende a desfavorecer la producción y el consumo de bienes básicos para los grandes segmentos de la población. Entonces, también hay que avanzar mucho en esta transformación de estructuras de producción y consumo. Muchas gracias.
Solo para complementar lo que dijo Abelardo, hay un concepto que es de recrecimiento, si no estoy equivocada, ¿no? Que yo creo que sería tal vez muy importante para nuestros países donde hay una gran cantidad de población que necesita montones de cosas, ¿no? Porque es población que vive por debajo del nivel de la pobreza, y esta población tiene que ser integrada, ¿no? En el proceso de crecimiento. O sea, yo pienso que habría más que como que reordenar el crecimiento para algunas áreas y pensar en decrecimiento para otras áreas, ¿no? No sé cómo ves esto, Ipek.
Gracias. Adelante, Ipek.
Thank you for some excellent feedback and comments. Okay, it was a whole bunch of questions, so let me start with the first one. And to the extent that I understood well with the intermediation of the translation, so the linkage between consumption and well-being, that's one issue that you raised. And I think, again, the pandemic was a very opportune time to increase people's awareness that well-being is not so strictly dependent on and tied with consumption of commodities. There was so much sharings on social media and in popular media that so many people felt actually well under the lockdown by being able to just to stop, take a breath, not go out all that much, and being able to be more tranquil within their household. So I think the awareness that tie between consumption and well-being really transformed in a lot of people's minds through the experience of the pandemic. So that really creates an opportunity for us to build on that in terms of moving towards less consumption, commodity consumption oriented, and I will make the linkage to the last point, more maybe local services consumed, local services-led growth rather than commodity consumption-led growth. Or in my country, we've been going through a horrible construction-led growth. And because, why do I say horrible? Because it's also has very huge environmental negative implications, where a lot of the construction industry through private-public partnerships has confiscated the commons, the common public areas. You know, what is supposed to be public property has been confiscated, serving the construction industry. So in that sense, I think, coming to the question of these two questions of what can companies do, what can we teach our students who are in the management program, right? You said. I think a cultural change and increasing awareness is definitely part of the solution, but by itself, it's hardly sufficient, because as long as we have a competitive market economy, one company taking the lead on being more, having more green and purple policies, may very possibly make that company lose its competitive edge in the market, because they're taking the goodwill of, undertaking some policy implementation with higher costs. So there is inevitably the necessary condition for moving into a purple and green transition is through a central intervention. Central intervention at regulating markets in a very sophisticated and increasingly deeper regulation. One of the calls that I heard about under the pandemic was, why don't we have lockdown days even after the pandemic? You know, once a month, twice a month, lockdown days where everybody stays home, and nobody goes to work, and nobody, consumes, regulate, and there's so much innovation to be made also in terms of what kind of central intervention. But for that central intervention, the question of a transparent and efficient state also comes to the fore, right? So we are going through a period globally where states are increasingly corrupt, inefficient, unaccountable. So the question of what kind of state institution or organism do we need in order for the kinds of policies that we call for to be implemented, designed and implemented in an efficient way, in an innovative way, and in an accountable and transparent manner, in a participatory and democratic manner, is also very important. So the idea of social solidarity-based economies, I think it's again another very important future agenda item for social movements, for research, and for policy design. As Greece was trying to come out of that deep crisis with the huge imposition of austerity from the Troika, they announced a social, what do they call it? Solidarity economy national law. So I think there's a good, it was a very interesting example. And there was a feminist co-minister for labor behind that law, Rania Antonopoulos, who's also an inspiration to me for the Invest in Care research that I will be talking about on Wednesday. So I think there are, there are trials here and there that we can draw upon in terms of, while having a responsible, accountable, and efficient, transparent state intervene centrally to regulate, at the same time having these kinds of new models, economic models, being piloted and then being upscaled. I think it's really, and as the Buenos Aires document, the prior document, it says it's an ambitious proposal, but I don't think we have any choice left, honestly, other than moving along with these new agendas and thinking more innovatively and in a rather than this very narrow way of like, oh, okay, then what are the employers going to do? Are the workers, you know, we will have unemployment and we will be, you know, stay behind in international competition. And these are, you know, very narrow way of looking at things.
Muchas gracias, Ipek. ¿Alguna otra pregunta, comentario? Adelante.
Hola. Well, I would like to speak in English too. Since you're the guest, so I would like to speak in English. I'll do my best, I promise. So, well, my question is about this model, this system that you were talking about, which is encouraged not just by the people, but by the governments. I guess the real challenge is about governments doing something about this, you know, because they must regulate this lifestyle. Because in the middle of consumism, it's very difficult for us as students, as people in general, to stop and think about things like this. For example, like our well-being, you know. So my question is about what would you propose to our governments and people around the world to hear this, and how do you think they would react, and I mean governments especially, to these regulations? Because it's true that we need to encourage this lifestyle as people, as human beings. But I think the main key is about governments because they rule the whole system. So I think it's about them to encourage these kind of actions and ideas. Thank you.
Buenos días, muchas gracias por estar aquí y por la participación que nos dio. Yo tengo una pregunta respecto a nuestro país, a México. Tenemos un país donde nuestro pensamiento, bueno, nuestro gobierno es grande y la mayoría son varones los que gobiernan, entonces tenemos como muy cerrada la opinión en contexto de las mujeres. ¿Usted considera que México sería buena opción la economía morada, ya que además de que los pensadores son muy cerrados, nuestra economía no ha sido bien manejada hasta el día de hoy, ya que tenemos muchas cuestiones de que falta presupuesto para las familias, para alimentos, para educación, para medicina? Y pues no hay como mucha oportunidad de que nosotras, las mujeres, podamos aportar ideas o de que seamos como más cooperativas en el sentido de la gobernanza de nuestro país. Entonces, ¿usted qué piensa respecto a eso?
I think the two questions actually complement each other nicely, about the role of the government and the particular situation in Mexico. So first of all, the problems that you shared with respect to the government here are definitely not specific to Mexico. I think it's prevalent in so many countries around the world. There's an increasing deterioration of democratic systems of democracies and an increasing transformation into also more, if not populist, totalitarian and authoritarian regimes. So I think it's a global phenomenon that we're facing, and because of that, I think it's very important to have to build solidarity networks, not only think about the nation state as a unit of analysis by itself, but to think about, global coordination and global solidarity networks. And the governments will change with demands that come from the grassroots, right? From the ground. So we also have a lot of responsibility for moving that agenda forward and pressuring. And so what do I propose to the governments? First of all, within the context of this presentation, think of green and purple economy framework as perceive that framework as a strategy for building a robust economic economy, national economy, and a robust society into the near future. So the green and the purple economy framework, as I try to emphasize, is not only a response to the environmental crisis and the crisis of inequalities and the care crisis, but they also provide for us a tool, a strategy about thinking of a bright future and moving out of the sort of the economic crisis and for rebuilding in a stronger manner. So use that as an opportunity. See that would be my main proposal. And in terms of the lack of budgets, I think that's an important place to start from. And that's where a lot of my work focuses on. That's where I will be talking about on Wednesday. The allocation of fiscal spending entails important decisions made by people who design fiscal policy, who make budgets, right? And I think that budget allocation decision, whether when you announce a fiscal stimulus package for Mexico, for instance, how much of that fiscal stimulus package goes towards particular sectors, stimulus to particular sectors, such as, let's say, building physical infrastructure and construction, versus investing in healthcare and investing in education and social care services, is a decision that has to do with, how you perceive their economic value. So they don't have only social value, they also have economic value. So what I will be presenting on Wednesday is a framework by which we can call fiscal policymakers' decisions into question in a rationalized framework, saying if you invest this much of Mexican funds in this sector, in a purple sector, versus in a green sector, versus in a conventional sector, such as construction, investing in physical infrastructure, what are the results in terms of the number of jobs you create, the amount of poverty that you alleviate, the gender equality objectives, and so on. So I think, that's a way for the governments to think. And the good news is that it is actually being adopted by ministries of finance in some countries now. So there is some progress, some transformation. One last thing, because you mentioned the university and higher education institutions in a number of questions, coming back to your questions. The European Union recently announced they have a funding structure, the European Union, for higher education institutions and research, where all EU member countries and then contributing countries, candidate countries, such as Turkey, are part of. So it's a huge wider Europe based research framework that has funding and publications and projects and so on. So recently, the EU, it's called the Horizon Framework. The EU Horizon Framework adopted finally a decision, and they started implementing it, that unless a university has a gender equality plan, they cannot apply for research funding anymore. So in order for any university to apply for funding, they have to create and start implementing a gender equality plan within the university. And my university, where I've been working at since early 2000s, and where I've been involved in advocating gender equality policies with some meager progress, and then with backlashes coming from Turkish politics and so on. Very mixed story. But finally, they did it in less than a year. The minute they heard we would not be able to apply for research funding anymore unless we had a gender equality plan, in less than a year, my university came up with a gender equality plan and just, made it, and announced it. The plan has a lot of shortcomings. So it needs to be improved, and, it needs to start going to implementation. But, having these kinds of, using these kinds of central regulating bodies, I don't know what that would be, for instance, for Mexican higher education. Is it a regional research framework that you're a part of, or whatever, the UN related frameworks? So those kinds of regional and global frameworks are very good entry points, actually, for creating that change. And I recommend look at that EU gender equality plan, because it has 5 dimensions. So it's a very comprehensive one. It's not only about equal representation of women and men, equal career access. It has work-life balance, prevention of sexual harassment and gender-based violence at the university. And integration of gender equality into teaching and research in all the departments, in all the areas, is another important component. So that's one thing, and it's very recent.
Muchas gracias, IPEC. Muchas gracias al público por sus interesantes preguntas. Concluimos esta parte de la conferencia. Le doy la palabra a Marcia unos minutos para dar instrucciones con respecto a las actividades del taller. Adelante, Marcia.
Bueno, vamos a continuar con actividades del taller para los que se inscribieron en el workshop, en el taller, ¿no? Entonces, les vamos a mandar por email el día de hoy para que ustedes lo puedan hacer, ¿ok? Bueno, muchas gracias a ustedes por la participación. Muchas gracias a IPEC por haber aceptado nuestra invitación.
Antes, nada más recordarles que el taller es un taller que, bueno, el evento es un evento itinerante. Mañana le toca el turno a la unidad Coajimalpa a las 10 de la mañana, ¿sí? Y el miércoles va a ser en la unidad Azcapotzalco también a las 10 de la mañana. Los que no se han inscrito, les recomendamos que se inscriban, ¿sí? Están a tiempo de inscribirse en este momento, ¿sí? Porque entonces van a poder participar de las actividades del taller que se van a llevar a cabo en la plataforma de Zoom, ¿sí? Entonces, exhortamos a todas y todos que se inscriban para que participen de las actividades del taller que van a coordinar la doctora Marcia Leites y el doctor Carlos Sales. Muy bien. Y ahorita que cerremos, sí, les invitamos unos bocadillos aquí afuera. Muchas gracias.
Exactamente, se les hace la invitación. Muchísimas gracias a nuestro presidium. Thank you very much. Y pues se les invita a degustar un café y unos bocadillos aquí en el auditorio. Gracias, Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, casa abierta al tiempo.
Recording stopped.